So a complete reversal of thought systems requires that we dismantle the ego's armature, which is in the form of psychological defense mechanisms. And so this requires that we look at the problem of psychological defense mechanisms. And that brings us to our topic for this evening. Welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader for this session is Julie. Wanted to review a little bit about what we have seen so far in this chapter. And so it has been about spiritual vision. And spiritual vision can only be used for a blessing. Its function is always to save. But the mechanism of how vision will save you is not really something we're concerned with. But what we are concerned with is when we make the choice. For the choice is often the ego would have you delay these things and push them off into the future, whereas the Holy Spirit would encourage you to make the choice now. But the choice, when, is your choice. And you can be sure of when you make the choice that you will find the path that the Holy Spirit will guide you correctly along the path. So the ego puts up a barrier, many barriers, many forms of barriers. They're all really one barrier in many forms. And that is to convince you that you cannot succeed in learning this course. And all the variations on that lie that might arise. And so within the journey of the textbook, it explains that we're at a crucial period for this is where the clear distinction between your true identity, you as understood by the Holy Spirit, and your ego false identity must be made complete so that there's no middle ground where it's vague. And so now is the time for choosing between yourself and an illusion of yourself. Please don't underestimate the depth of that choice. And it's either got to be one or the other. You either are invested in prior versions of yourself and continue to hold on to them, or are willing to allow them to be dismantled so that the eternal truth of yourself could be clear in your awareness. So, as this is, again, a summary, we're going to look closer at the whole illusion that we've made that has to do with misdirecting our power and believing that the external world has power to enslave us. Another way to say that, the belief that the external world is the cause of our unhappiness or our despair or our self-concept. This is the same belief that causes separation. It's a fundamental illusion, and it's stated in very succinctly here, the illusion that the false self you made and all that it made should be your dictator, your master, your guide, your source. In other words, that the ego would assume the role of being your God. That is the whole belief that caused the separation, and we are dismantling that one piece of armor at a time. So with that, we'll go into our new reading. But Julie, there is a sentence from the previous section.
Only an illusion stands between you and your brother, and the holy self you share together. How does one overcome illusions? Surely not by force or anger, nor by opposing them in any way. Merely by letting reason tell you that they contradict reality. They go against what must be true. The opposition comes from them and not reality. Reality opposes nothing. What merely is needs no defense and offers none. Only illusions need defense because of weakness. And how can it be difficult to walk the way of truth when only weakness interferes? You are the strong one in this seeming conflict, and you need no defense. Everything that needs defense you do not want, for anything that needs defense will weaken you.
Mm-hmm. So the elaboration on what is meant by defense, we will address in a few moments. So we will get to that. This whole section centers around that. But in terms of the idea that they are introducing here, we read a moment ago in the summary that now is the time where you must choose between the illusion of yourself and your true self, one or the other. And to make that choice, you must see clearly through spiritual vision and spiritual reason. These are choices made at the level of your soul. And so one must employ attributes of the soul to make these choices. They're not purely intellectual, which experience will teach you this is not just an intellectual choice. This is something in the depths of your being that you choose between the illusion of yourself or your true self. And so, by what's necessary is that you be able to distinguish hour by hour in your life your true self from that thing that pretends to be you, the ego illusion of yourself. And reason will tell you that these two selves contradict each other, that they are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and specifically the illusion of yourself contradicts reality. And so ultimately, this course will lead you in the direction of understanding reality as the creator planned it. And anything that's not a part of reality must be an illusion. So the distinction, it's really very simple. If it's a part of the creator's plan for reality, that's true. And if it's not compatible with that or the opposite to that, it's not true. Well, yet we need to see this through the lens of spiritual reason and spiritual vision to be clear of what is reality, what is real, and what is not real. And when once we do that, once we take the stance with what is real and of the creator's plan, and that our part is essential part of that plan, then we need no defense. Our self concept is no longer fragile and weak and no longer having to adapt to external situations. it's an eternal self concept. It's consistent all the time. So you don't need to defend it, and you don't need any of the psychological mechanisms for defending that self concept. Only illusions need defense. Why? Because they were never true, they never had power. And in order to prop them up into a facade, into Jung called it a persona, pretending to be something that needs to be defended because it's not true and therefore is easily seen as mistaken. You are the strong one in what seems to be a conflict between your true self and your false self. You need no defense. Okay, so that's the foundation for our topic this evening.
Consider what the ego wants defenses for. Always to justify what goes against the truth, flies in the face of reason, and makes no sense. Can this be justified? What can this be except an invitation to insanity, to save you from the truth? And what would you be saved from but what you fear? Belief in sin needs great defense, and at enormous cost. All that the Holy Spirit offers must be defended against and sacrificed. For sin is carved into a block out of your peace and laid between you and its return.
So we're going to do a deep dive into ego defenses. For your soul has no need for them. And ego is constantly engaged in a pretension, an illusion, and trying to convince your mind that that belief is justified. It wants to always to justify uh, the lie, what goes against the truth, always to defend itself from spiritual reason. And so let's be clear, we're not talking on the physical plane here per se, although when one is convinced enough of the illusion, you can act out on the physical plane. But our concern is with the cause of the confusion, which is in the beliefs of the mind. And so these defenses are reactions of the mind to try to maintain a past version of yourself, which was an illusion, and to try to keep that going, even though it flies in the face of reason and makes no sense. We're not saying any of this to the point of view of the soul would make any sense at all. But from the ego's point of view, it depends on this illusion and you giving your power away to it, and that game continuing to be played. And so it's going to protect it using many of the mechanisms that we will share in just a moment. So let's just go into the following is a summary I've done based on what the Course in Miracles has taught me about these defenses. It's trying to describe it in a language that might be more psychological or accessible to those who have a sense of defense, psychological defense mechanisms. So the Course says, of all the prices the ego would exact, that defenses cost you the most, because people engage in psychological defenses without even realizing they're doing it. These are responses or reactions to a situation where your ego is somehow questioned, or its power is questioned, and the mind immediately responds with that knee-jerk type reaction. And so that keeps that knee-jerk reaction is intended to keep you embedded in the ego's thought system. And then use that defense as an opening for a counterattack against the source. And so right away you're in the middle of the battlefield. And of course, we know that this course teaches you to remain above the battlefield. But to remain above the battlefield, you've got to recognize when your mind is responding with defense mechanisms. And we will label them shortly. So this concept did not appear uniquely or originally in A Course of Miracles. I believe the year was 1896 when Sigmund Freud identified it, a variety of different psychological mechanisms. But he looked at defense mechanisms only for the mentally ill. What we're now aware of is everybody's using defense mechanisms. There's no one that doesn't have an impulse towards protecting the false self that they've made, giving their power to the false self. So Freud was onto it long ago. But now in the modern age where we're applying miracles, it requires that we do something with all that energy and all that habit, psychological habits that have been developed, responding that way for decades of time and not doing it. So, what the Holy Spirit's going to do, rather than crush your defenses or try to yank them out of your mind, which she would not do, she's going to repurpose them. She's going to called reinterpret in the course, but it's really taking that energy that was used to defend and now to defend delusions and use it for defending the truth. So your mind can still engage in those mechanisms, but now allied with truth. And you can't teach yourself how to do that. The Holy Spirit has to teach you how to do this. And what is interesting is until such time as we've given that over to the Holy Spirit to guide us, we won't trust our own thoughts, because you won't, the truth never needs defense. And so the fact that you're defending something is an indication that you're not even convinced that it's true. And so it puts you in an odd position of defending something that you don't fully believe in. Talk about splitting you into two. This is the split between your false self and your true self, where the false self is defending what even you are not sure is the truth. So this course would not wreck and disrupt and crush your defenses. That would leave one in a psychological state which could be very difficult to maneuver in. This course allows you to keep the defenses, but reinterprets them, but no longer are they used for attack. The old form is laid down because there's no need for attack. And the old way of using defenses are discarded because the whole idea of attacking is no longer has any appeal. And finally, the goal is that this reinterpretation of defenses break, is to remove the wall, the armature of the ego that acts as a barrier to our inner light, and replace it with the atonement, which is your security, your base, your home, your sense of trust in all that is in God's creation. And that leads you to the stage that follows from lack of defense, which is that you become invulnerable. The goal here is that you would discard your old ego defenses, feel secure in the atonement, and be invulnerable. In my defenselessness, my safety lies, is one of the workbook lessons. So, we are not going to do a deep dive into this list, but I did say that Freud identified many defenses. Most of you are already familiar with denial. You've seen it as a defense mechanism. What we're less familiar with is the reinterpretation of denial under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, so that it winds up being used to defend the truth. So you wind up denying what is false, denying the error. Again, this being an illustration of you still using the defense, but you're using it on behalf of the truth. And so there are many, and Freud identified many of the other defenses that are here in the first, most of the list. I've added a few more that I think are unique to the course, such as detailed planning of your life. We're not going to be able to get into all this tonight, but one can use anything that contributes to the framework of the ego's worldview that can be used as a defense mechanism. And that includes your special relationships. That includes the way you think about yourself being a child of time in contrast to a child of eternity, and on and on and on. There's a lot that can be taught and learned here in the reinterpretation of defenses, of which we're just doing, this is a summary view of it here in this session. So with that, we'll get back to our regular scheduled program.
Yet how can peace be so fragmented? It is still whole, and nothing has been taken from it. See how the means and the material of evil dreams are nothing. In truth, you and your brother stand together, with nothing in between. God holds your hands, and what can separate whom he has joined as one with him? It is your Father whom you would defend against. Yet it remains impossible to keep love out. God rests with you in quiet, undefended, and wholly undefending. For in this quiet state alone is strength and power. Here can no weakness enter, for here is no attack, and therefore no illusions. Love rests in certainty. Only uncertainty can be defensive. And all uncertainty is doubt about yourself.
So look a little more closely at this ego plan for defense and try to understand it in simple terms, we said earlier that we're not talking per se about defending yourself from lions and tigers and bears. We're not talking about physically arming yourself with physical weapons, but we are acknowledging if the mind is so confused about its identity, it can pick up weapons believing that its most important thing to do is to strike out against another person, protect yourself. There's that whole drama here. That's not the center of our attention here. The center of our attention is what goes on in the mind. And what it says is, from the ego's perspective, what it's defending against is your father and your relationship to your creator and your awareness that you are in relationship to the creator and all its creation. It seeks to impose a barrier between your awareness of between your awareness and that relationship. It seeks to cut off communication so you would be unaware of that relationship. So ultimately, all defense is a mechanism or a means to separate you from awareness of the creator. Yet, those are but delaying maneuvers, for it remains impossible to keep love out. The ego is set upon this program that cannot succeed for long. For the truth is, the presence of God is already with you, inside, in quiet, in strength, and in power. And this is a key to your invulnerability. The presence of God is already with you in strength and power, where no weakness can enter, no attack can enter, no illusions can enter. You are, in fact, all your soul is already invulnerable. It's only in your conscious mind that isn't clear about all of this. So this brings up a topic which we'll see more in upcoming chapters. It has to do with certainty. We're talking about a state of mind where the mind is no longer confused, no longer doubtful or unbelieving, but is now in a higher state called certainty. This invulnerability is a state of certainty. It's not wondering if I'm invulnerable. It is attained a level of confidence in the higher mind, the Holy Spirit, a level of trust and confidence and safety in that guidance that leaves it no longer doubting. So that would be, we would think of that in time as being in our future of our spiritual path, like where we become on a daily basis certain. But in fact, the light within us, this holy divine gift, is certain already. It's just our conscious mind that has not fully awakened to that state as yet. And as we read in the previous section, all uncertainty is ultimately centers around your self-concept and confusion about what am I? And so that has to be addressed, and we are addressing it by looking more closely at defenses and suggesting it's time to dismantle them.
How weak is fear? How little and how meaningless? How insignificant before the quiet strength of those whom love has joined. This is your enemy, a frightened mouse that would attack the universe. How likely is it that it will succeed? Can it be difficult to disregard its feeble squeaks that tell of its omnipotence and would drown out the hymn of praise to its creator that every heart throughout the universe forever sings as one? Which is the stronger? Is it this tiny mouse or everything that God created? You and your brother are not joined together by this mouse, but by the will of God. And can a mouse betray whom God has joined?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do a social commentary on what's just said in this paragraph, but I'm really stepping outside of the course and commenting on how things appear in our culture and how that is reflected in this statement. And I'm going to make this statement that our culture leans towards identifying with weakness. It's very acceptable in our culture to lean into and care strongly about all things that are weak, and strength and being on aligned with strength and power are viewed skeptically or with suspicion. Um, and so I'm just pointing that out. You can here it talks about identifying with a mouse, or and we read a moment ago in previous paragraph that the divine spirit within you is the strong one. The ego is not the strong one. The ego needs to defend itself, but the light within you is strong and needs no defense. And so when we put those two side by side, the feeble squeaks of our weaker version of ourself, because ultimately, okay, I'm sorry, I want to go back here a minute. All uncertainty is doubt about oneself. And so if we're really talking about your self concept here, we're not talking specifically about others. We're talking about how you integrate with your true self and a tendency to lean into your weakness and tell that version of yourself again and again. And thus the course would refer to that here as an uncertain and frightened state that it suggests it is a tiny mouse, with that our self concept is forks. There's a branch in the road in our self concept that we must choose. On one side is where we are likened to a tiny mouse. On the other side, we are likened to all that God created. The strength and power of the Creator instilled in you for bringing about love, making love real. So I know that's very dramatic, but and this is an interpretation where it says, which is stronger, the tiny mouse or everything God created? You and your brother are not joined together. The mouse is a symbol for weakness. You are joined together by the will of God. How can a mouse betray what God has joined.
If you but recognized how little stands between you and your awareness of your union with your brother. Be not deceived by the illusions it presents of size and thickness, weight, solidity, and firmness of foundation. Yes, to the body's eyes, it looks like an enormous solid body, immovable as is a mountain. Yet with you is a force that no illusions can resist. This body only seems to be immovable. This force is irresistible in truth. What then must happen when they come together? Can the illusion of immovability be long defended from what is quietly passed through and gone beyond?
So, what are they referring to here? They're referring to the veils or the barriers that stand between you and the truth of how we are united with one another, united with our brothers. In truth, the light with you and the light within your brothers are the of the same source and are harmonious and united forever. And that is certain and does not fluctuate based on events or your mood or even your awareness. But to the mind that is uncertain, it would seem as though many of these little things, illusions, stand between us and our brother, and they serve to deceive us about our holy relationship. And they many times are in our world, those differences, if you will, are emphasized, and great narratives and dramas around what the differences in form, so that your attention will be drawn to that rather than to recognize that we are all created equal. And so I have to, for the next part of this, I have to admit that I'm not sure what force that says within you is a force that no illusions can resist. Let's just assume that's another, for now, that's another word for the light within you, the presence of God's gift within you. Maybe later on find out, as is often the case in the course, that this force has a more specific meaning. Um, but here it's not altogether clear to my mind's eye, uh, if they were introducing something new that we haven't seen before, or if they are just using another metaphor in this paragraph alone. That's okay. The course, as you know, uses a lot of parables and a lot of metaphors, but I do notice that the force is capitalized, and that indicates that the editors thought that it meant the divine force, and the context here is clear that it means that its source is in the divine.
Forget not when you feel the need arise to be defensive about anything. You have identified yourself with an illusion, and therefore feel that you are weak because you are alone. This is the cost of all illusions. Not one but rests on the belief that you are separate. Not one that does not seem to stand, heavy and solid and immovable between you and your brother, and not one that truth cannot pass over lightly, and so easily that you must be convinced, in spite of what you thought it was, that it is nothing. If you forgive your brother, this must happen, for it is your unwillingness to overlook what seems to stand between you and your brother that makes it look impenetrable and defends the illusion of its immovability.
So it seems to me this final paragraph really says everything that needs to be said at this point, and I would encourage you to review it again, either tonight or later in the week, and see what it says to you after the passage of some time. But I want to unpack it here to get started on that process. So we're talking about ourselves, you and me practicing this course. And when the impulse to defend ourselves comes along, these can be very subtle things. Even if you were, I'm going to come up with a hypothetical situation here. If you were at a large dinner party and everybody was seated and someone did something with their fork and knife, like, I don't know, just something that would be highly unusual and not normally welcomed. Some kind of maybe they're very clumsy and don't know how to use a knife and fork. Even your mind would take notice of that right away and perhaps make something of it. Start a story up like, doesn't that fellow know how to use a knife and fork? Or why is he using his knife and fork that way? Like if he had both knife and fork in one hand and the spoon in the other, you would wonder, you've never seen anybody do that before. And so that would be a form of making much ado about nothing, making much ado about an illusion. I'm just citing that one example to illustrate how silly these things can be and how they can appear in all kinds of situations. This is, and it says whenever that reaction occurs, it's because you've identified yourself with the illusion that things have to be according to the way they've always been said should be, according to my experience and my culture and the norms of my family and my community. And anything that deviates from that is considered alien. And when we do, or when our mind takes that position of having a grievance against another, it's because we feel we're weak and we need to attack another in order to reassure ourselves that we're right. Clearly, an ego ploy. And this is the price that we pay for illusions, is belittling others that we might feel better about ourselves. All grievances have those dynamics to them. We should mention you can do this about to yourself as well, but we're focusing for the moment in this paragraph on when you with your brother. And all these are beliefs of proper behavior that would cause us to have an in group and an out group, somebody, a means for separating us from each other. And it seems to stand as an immovable barrier between you and another. And to the ego, it would be justification to permanently identify the other person as being unlovable and not worth your time, certainly not worth your respect, and you would out the person in some manner. That was the ego would have a victory if you chose that path. But here's the if you forgive your brother, then all of that dissipates as to being unimportant, insignificant, meaningless, and so that you can let it go. If it has no importance, no significance, there's no reason to hold on to it. Um, so it's a choice. And we make these choices, as I said, in the most ordinary of circumstances and everyday encounters. And so here's the choice: you can overlook the actions of another, or you can double down on your right to judge them and to hold that judgment as a grievance. Remember that grievance and hold it in your mind and label the other person in whatever terms you do, and then let that stand between you and your brother and make that to be a barrier. And so this is what the ego's been up to, is making much ado about nothing. And what we're learning in the course is that it's a choice. We can choose to overlook all manner of behaviors and words and even thoughts and feelings. And that's the key to the undoing of the power that the ego assumes it has in our life. I believe that's our last, yes. It would seem as though that is the end of our section here. I'll open it up to any comments you might have. That is a beginning of a very profound segment that is within the course, defense mechanisms, especially since we've been practicing them for decades of time and didn't know it. And now we've identified at least a partial list of them. We more abstractly identify how they function to, in our mind's reaction, to create artificial barriers between ourselves and others. We will, this is just the review. There's more to come. But for today and tomorrow and for this week, see if you can recognize when something I'll call, say, triggers you or bothers you in whatever way. If you pause when that happens, you'll lose your peace over it. You'll feel irritated. Pause for a moment and realize that that's an automated default reaction habit of the ego to immediately be annoyed at something someone else does. And in that pause, that's where the choice lies of whether or not you're going to continue to empower that instinctual reaction, or you're going to take your projections back and realize that's your own judgments being made and really isn't about the other person at all. So thank you all for your attention. We are back to our regular schedule now, and we'll pick up again next week. Thank you, Julie, for your reading, and God bless each and every one of you. Namaste.
Thank you, Julie.
Namaste. Thanks, Julie.
Julie.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Julie.
Good night,
Janica. You're welcome,
Jonica.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Kathy actually joined last night. And she texted me, she's like, is Jonica out of town? And I said, yes, that you'd be back tonight. Because she sometimes joins on Sundays.
Yes.